December 20th, 1943, 5:30 a.m. Kimbolton Air Base, England. A biting wind swept across the tarmac as 21-year-old Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown stood before his B-17 bomber, nicknamed Ye Old Pup. This was his first real combat mission as a qualified pilot. Brown hailed from Weston, West Virginia, a quiet farming town. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, he enlisted without hesitation, spent 2 years training, learning to fly this 30-ton flying fortress. The crew members boarded one by one. Co-pilot Second Lieutenant Spencer Luke, 27, from Ohio. This was his 5th mission. Navigator Al Sedok, 24, a former college math teacher. Bombardier Hugh Eckerode, 22, always clutching his fiancée's photograph. Then came the 5 gunners, including tail gunner, 19-year-old Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode on his 2nd mission. 10 young men who knew the grim statistics. Less than 25% of bomber crews survived 25 missions. At 6 a.m. sharp, 30 B-17s from the 379th Bomb Group took off into pre-dawn darkness. Target, Bremen, Germany, home to the Focke-Wulf aircraft manufacturing plant producing the Luftwaffe's primary fighter, the FW-190. Bremen was one of Germany's most heavily defended targets. Over 200 anti-aircraft guns, dozens of fighter squadrons, and experienced radar operators monitoring the skies constantly. Brown piloted Ye Older Pup, climbing to 22,000 feet, joining the massive formation of over 300 B-17s. P-40 escort fighters circled around the formation like protective sheepdogs. Crossing the North Sea, the sky remained eerily calm. Cabin temperature dropped to -40 degrees as crew members breathed through oxygen masks. At 9:45 a.m., the German coastline appeared. The radio crackled with warnings, enemy fighters taking off, approximately 50 aircraft. The P-47 escorts immediately accelerated towards the incoming hostiles. NE-10 and FW-90s swarmed through the bomber formation like wasps. Cannon tracers sliced through the sky. Several B-17s exploded into fireballs. White parachutes bloomed in the air. Brown gripped the controls tightly, fighting to maintain formation position, their only chance of survival. At 10:15 a.m., they reached Bremen. Anti-aircraft guns roared. Black explosive clouds blossomed around the formation, each representing thousands of deadly fragments. Brown felt the shockwaves hammering the aircraft like a giant's fists. Bombardier Eckenrode lay at the bomb site, waiting for the optimal drop moment. This required maintaining steady course for 30 seconds while they were sitting ducks, completely exposed to German fire. The bomb bay doors opened. 2 tons of bombs dropped away. Mission accomplished. Time to go home. But the real nightmare was just beginning. As they turned, an 88mm flak shell exploded directly beneath Ye Older Pup. The massive shockwave threw the plane sideways. Engine number 2 caught fire. Engineer Steiner activated the fire suppression system. The flames died, but the engine was destroyed. Worse still, another shell struck the tail section. The entire tailgun turret was blown into bloody fragments. 19-year-old Hugh Eckenrode died instantly. In his pocket was a letter from his mother about the farm's harvest and fresh apple pie waiting for his return. The cabin depressurized. Oxygen masks dropped automatically. -40-degree wind rushed through the holes. Brown's vision began to blur from hypoxia. Co-pilot Luke handed him a portable oxygen bottle, but the nightmare continued. 12 enemy fighters spotted the straggling bomber. Like sharks smelling blood, They attacked from all directions. Cannons and machine guns fired wildly. Tracers fell like rain upon ye olde pub. The fuselage skin tore open with countless holes. The hydraulic system shredded. Green fluid sprayed throughout the cabin. Engine number 4 took a hit. The electrical system short-circuited. Half the instrument panel went dark. The nose gunner was hit. A 20mm shell tore into his abdomen. Blood splattered across the windscreen. Navigator Sadok rushed to administer first aid, desperately pressing gauze against the wound. A shell pierced through the cockpit roof. Exploding fragments struck Brown's right shoulder. Searing pain. Blood soaked through his flight suit. Co-pilot Luke was also wounded. A fragment slashed his left leg. Both pilots bled as they flew. When the enemy fighters exhausted their ammunition and departed, Brown assessed the catastrophic damage. The fuselage had over 200 bullet holes. The tail turret had vanished, replaced by a 6-foot hole. Freezing wind filled the cabin with ice crystals. Of 10 crew members, 1 was dead. 6 were wounded, 2 critically. Engine number 2 was destroyed. Engine number 4 at only 30% power. Airspeed dropped to 120 miles per hour, half their normal speed. They were completely alone, 600 kilometers from England, all through German-controlled airspace. According to procedure, they should bail out and become Palpa's spoons. But Brown looked at his dying crew. In a German prison camp, they would die before receiving proper medical care. He made his decision. He was flying them home. Even if there was only a 1% chance, he pushed the throttles on the remaining engines. A old pup shuddered, slowly heading west. At that moment, at Oldenburg Airfield, Germany, 26-year-old Oberleutnant Franz Stickler had just finished an intense dogfight. His Me-09G bore fresh bullet holes. Earlier, he'd shot down 2 B-17 bombers, bringing his score to 27 victories. Just 1 more, and he would earn the coveted Knight's Cross, the highest honor for a Luftwaffe pilot. Stickler was born in Regensburg, Bavaria. His father was also a pilot in World War I. Stickler had been fascinated with flying since childhood, started learning gliders at 12. At 20, he joined Lufthansa and became a commercial pilot, dreaming of peaceful skies. But the war changed everything. He was conscripted, joined the Luftwaffe, first fighting in North Africa with the 27th Fighter Wing. He'd shot down British Hurricanes, American P-40 Warhawks, and been shot down himself 4 times, each time miraculously surviving. In North Africa, his commanding officer, Gustav Rodel, was a stern but honorable officer. Rodel often told them, "We are warriors, not executioners. Never fire on parachuting enemies. That's not combat, that's murder. If I see anyone do it, I'll shoot them down myself. This isn't just an order, it's the rules of war. It's the bottom line of humanity." These words were deeply etched in Stickler's mind. Though he'd shot down 27 enemy aircraft, he had never attacked an opponent who'd lost the ability to fight. At 1:30 p.m., Stickler was refueling when the airfield control tower issued an alert. Radar detected a lone enemy aircraft, altitude 15,000 feet, flying slowly westward, assessed as possibly a damaged bomber. Stickler immediately jumped into the cockpit. His black Me-10 roared down the runway. This could be his 28th kill. That Knight's Cross medal was within reach. He climbed to 16,000 feet, searching westward. Soon, through gaps in the clouds, he spotted the target. A B-17 bomber flying in an extremely unstable attitude, clearly badly damaged. Stickler accelerated closer, preparing to attack from behind. But as the distance closed, he saw a sight that shocked him. This bomber was a flying miracle. The tail turret had completely vanished, leaving a massive gaping hole. The left wing was severely damaged, the aileron nearly falling off. The fuselage was riddled with bullet holes, like a honeycomb. Through that large hole, he could see inside the cabin. Several American soldiers lying on the floor, obviously badly wounded. A young man knelt beside them, desperately performing first aid. Blood everywhere. Another pilot struggled to control the aircraft, his shoulders stained red with blood. This wasn't a warplane. This was a flying coffin. Inside were young men fighting desperately to survive. Stickler's finger rested on the cannon trigger. All he needed was a gentle squeeze. 2 seconds of firing would earn him his 28th kill and the Knight's Cross. But his finger couldn't press down. He remembered Rudolph's words. Don't fire on parachuting enemies. Wasn't this bomber just like a pilot who'd already opened his parachute? They'd lost the ability to fight. Their guns were frozen or destroyed, unable to return fire, unable to maneuver. Firing on them. What difference was there from firing on a parachute? Stickler experienced an intense internal struggle. He thought of his brother August, shot down over England in 1940, dead at just 24. He thought of comrades fallen in aerial combat. He thought of war's cruelty and meaninglessness. He looked at that bomber. Inside were young men just like him. They too had parents, loved ones, dreams, just wore different uniforms. This morning, they were thinking about returning to base, having a hot meal, writing a letter home. But now, they were fighting for survival like hunted animals. Stickler made his decision, a decision that could get him executed for treason. But he did it anyway, because it was the only decision that would let him continue looking at himself in the mirror. He didn't fire. Instead, he flew his Eminence 109 alongside the bomber, flying in formation with it. When Brown saw that black Me-09, his heart nearly stopped. They had no defensive capability left. Facing an enemy fighter, they were lambs to the slaughter. But strangely, that Me didn't fire. Instead, it slowly approached, flying to their left side. Brown could clearly see through the shattered cockpit window that German pilot's face, young, focused, eyes complex with emotion. The German pilot made hand gestures, pointing downward, then pointing left. Co-pilot, Luke said quietly, "He wants us to land." Brown shook his head. If they landed in Germany, the critically wounded would die in a Pu'u camp. They needed an English hospital, professional surgery, and blood transfusions. Brown continued flying west. The German pilot saw them refuse to land, then made an even crazier decision. He maintained formation, flying tight on the bomber's left side, positioning his fighter as a shield. Stickler knew German ground anti-aircraft units would recognize the Me-109's silhouette as long as he flew alongside. Ground fire wouldn't dare shoot. He was going to escort this bomber through German airspace to the coastline. He was using his own life to protect an enemy's life. Brown finally understood. This German pilot wasn't here to kill them. He was here to save them. He felt his throat tighten, his eyes well up. In this brutal war, in this sky of killing, there was still such a ray of humanity. 2 aircraft flew side by side, crossing German territory. German ground observers saw this strange formation. An Eminence 109 escorting a -17. They picked up phones, wanting to report, but didn't know what to say. This was too bizarre. Several anti-aircraft guns aimed at the bomber, but gunners hesitated because that German fighter flew so close, firing might hit their own. They flew for 15 minutes. Every minute felt like an eternity. Inside the cabin, Navigator Sadok continued treating the wounded. The nose gunner had lost too much blood, his face pale as paper. Sadok had used up all medical supplies. He removed his own shirt, tore it into strips, continued applying pressure to the wound. Temperature had dropped to -35 degrees. Everyone was shivering from cold, blood loss, and shock. All they could do was pray. At 2:15 p.m., the North Sea coastline appeared on the horizon. That gray coastline represented hope, represented survival. Stickler knew his escort must end here. Flying farther would take him into Allied-controlled territory. He looked toward Brown. Two young men, separated by just a few meters. Their eyes met. No words, but everything was understood. Stickler raised his right hand, saluting Brown. This was a pilot's salute to a pilot, a warrior's tribute to a warrior, a human's respect for another human. Brown struggled to raise his wounded right arm. Returning the salute, tears blurred his vision. Stickler took one last look at this miraculously still-flying bomber, then pulled hard on the stick. The M-109 rolled inverted, flying east, disappearing into the clouds. Brown watched that black fighter's silhouette recede. His heart filled with indescribable emotions. Gratitude, respect, confusion, and deep weariness of war. Ye Olde Pup flew alone across the North Sea. After flying an hour, the English coast finally appeared. Brown saw those familiar white cliffs, the white cliffs of Dover. They'd made it. Inside the cabin, cheers and sobs erupted. They crossed through hell and finally made it home. Brown radioed the tower, requesting emergency landing clearance. The tower replied, runway cleared, ambulances and fire trucks standing by. Brown lowered the landing gear, but only 2 wheels extended. The third was stuck. This meant, on landing, the plane would be unbalanced, could flip over, could catch fire. But there was no choice. Fuel was nearly exhausted. They had to land immediately. The wheels touched down. Ye Olde Pup slammed hard onto the runway. The gear that hadn't deployed scraped along the runway, throwing sparks. The plane tilted to one side, the wings scraping the ground. Brown stamped on the brakes. The plane skidded for 500 meters. Finally, coming to a stop, engines died. Everything fell silent. Then the cabin erupted with thunderous cheers. They'd made it. Ambulances and fire trucks came roaring up. Medics rushed into the cabin. Ground crew walked around the aircraft, stunned by the damage. A veteran mechanic said, "Hell, how did this plane fly back? It should have broken apart in midair. Over 200 bullet holes, 2 engines destroyed. By all engineering standards, this aircraft should not have been able to fly, but it flew home, carrying 9 living crew members." That evening, the base commander came for the mission debriefing. Brown described the bombing run, the attacks, and finally, that German pilot. When he mentioned the enemy fighter escorting them through German airspace, the entire room fell silent. The commander said, "Lieutenant Brown, this incident you cannot mention again. We cannot let the troops know that German pilots can have noble character too. This is an order. Seal this information." Brown could only nod, obeying orders. But in his heart, he swore someday he would find that German pilot and tell him, "Thank you." Meanwhile, at Oldenburg Airfield, Stickler didn't mention the encounter to anyone. In his flight log, he simply wrote, "Pursued a damaged Binos 17, failed to shoot down, target escaped." He didn't mention he'd escorted an enemy aircraft, because he knew telling the truth would mean execution. But that night, Stickler slept soundly. He'd done the right thing. No military law, no medal, no honor was worth trading for those young men's lives. He'd preserved his humanity. The war continued. Brown completed his remaining 24 missions. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. Brown returned to America, attended college, then rejoined the U.S. Air Force, serving until 1965, then became a State Department diplomat. Stickler joined G4 Squadron, flying the MNI's 262 jet fighter until war's end. After the war, he lost everything. In 1953, he immigrated to Canada, starting a new life in Vancouver as a businessman. 40 years passed, two men living separate lives, both thinking they would never meet again. Until 1986, Brown was invited to attend the Gathering of Eagles at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Someone asked him about his most memorable experience in World War II. Brown was silent for a long time. Then he decided to stay silent no longer. He told the story of December 20th, 1943. The entire hall fell silent. Many old pilots had tears in their eyes. Afterward, a retired colonel told him, "You must find him." Brown began a long search. He wrote letters to German pilot associations, placed ads in German veteran publications. 1 year passed, no response. 2 years passed, still nothing. He was ready to give up. On January 18th, 1990, Brown received a letter from Canada. "Dear Charles," the letter began, "I read your ad. I believe I am the man you're looking for." December 20th, 1943. I flew an MV-109Gs over Bremen. I encountered a damaged Binos 17 ye olde pup. I couldn't fire on an enemy who'd lost the ability to fight, so I escorted you to the coast. Now, knowing you're alive fills me with indescribable joy. The signature read, "Franz Stickler." Brown immediately called Stickler. The moment the call connected, both old men couldn't speak, only wept. 2 weeks later, in Florida, in a hotel lobby, two white-haired old men met for the first time. They recognized each other immediately. Their eyes were still the same eyes that had met in the sky 47 years ago. They embraced like long-lost brothers. "Why didn't you fire?" Brown asked. "I couldn't," Stickler replied. "You had lost the ability to fight, shooting helpless people. That's not what a warrior does. Following the rules of war preserves your humanity. Even in war, some things cannot be compromised." Brown gripped his hand tightly. "You saved 9 lives." "No," Stickler corrected him. 10. Your tail gunner had already died. The two old men fell silent. For those young men who never returned. From that day on, they became close friends. They called each other often, visited back and forth. Their families became friends. Their grandchildren played together. No one could imagine these two kindly old men had once met on the edge of life and death. On March 22, 2008, Franz Stickler died in Vancouver at 92. 8 months later, on November 24th, Charlie Brown died in Miami at 87, just as they flew side by side that December day. Even leaving this world, they chose the same year. Their story became a best-selling book. A Higher Call by Adam Makos. Swedish metal band Sabaton created a song for them, No Bullets Fly. The U.S. Air Force Academy teaches their story to cadets about true honor. Brown's descendants now number 25. All exist because a German pilot chose humanity over a medal, chose life over a kill. Stickler never received the Knight's Cross, but he said, "I have no regrets. That medal wasn't worth 10 lives. I kept my soul." This story reminds us, war is cruel, but humanity is stronger than war. Maintaining sanity in war's madness, choosing mercy driven by hate, following your heart when orders and conscience conflict. That is true courage. Think of that German pilot at 8,000 feet who lowered his trigger finger. Think of those two aircraft that should have been killing each other, but flew side by side. Think of that embrace across 47 years. War teaches us to hate, but humanity lets us learn forgiveness. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Every week, we bring you little-known World War II legends. Tell us in the comments where you're from and what stories about humanity's light on the battlefield you've heard. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive. Let us remember those who died in war and those who preserved their humanity, because they make us believe, even in the darkest moments, light never truly disappears.